been about a month and a half since my last video where I did the planning for the checklist application. So you might have seen on the banner that I got an update of the banner with the new checklists layout. Just show you quickly what I did, but most of the details about the checklist will be in the help associated with the actual checklist application. But now under my checklists, we can see that I do have a checklist. So it shows you a checklist that I have. There's an example of a checklist. There's a checklist I did to actually track checklist stuff I was doing while I was working on the checklist. I've still got a few things to do, but most of the checklist and the template functionality is in place. You see I've got there's an example of a checklist. It's got things like resources associated with it. So say I have requirements management resource. So this resource is a link, so I can click out here and go to that resource. I can also have videos. Not really the video for this checklist, it's really for testing, but you can see I can have resources associated with the checklist, also with the checklist items. I can do things like mark a checklist as item is done or not done just by clicking on it. I can also click on that checklist item, get more details about what that checklist item details are, add comments, add evidence, actually upload evidence file. So all that's in place as well. Got the templates going. So here's an example of a couple of templates. So for example, I've got a boat preparation template, which I can then use by clicking on this to create a new checklist specific for boat preparation for maybe when I'm taking it out next year. So I won't get into a lot of the details, but just to let you know that the checklist functionality is in there. I can also do things like change the status on the checklist. So as I was shown in the planning, where I want to be able to go from when a checklist is active, and in that case I can take the checklist back to under construction if I want to make changes to that checklist, or mark it as done if I've actually completed with working on that checklist. So the main thing I still need to do is create some templates, some more meaningful templates, and also to do the data analysis. So that's probably going to take a while, so might be able to start on that in a week or so, because I still got a little bit more cleanup on the basic checklist functionality to do, and some of these extra items down here that I plan to do as I went along. So the rest of this video, I'll just go through some of the other things I did as I went along, and where actual implementation changed from the planning, to give you an idea of things I ran into, and things I wanted to do, like rearrange the code to make it easier to find where the components were. I was thinking of adding modules, Angular modules to this. I didn't do it, but I think I need to use modules, so first thing I'm going to do is add modules to my FPM starter, and then I'll be in a good place to have modules in any future Angular applications. It's not, because this is really just a hobby, it's not super important that I modularize this, but I think I can see now where modules would be useful for organizing the code. The other thing I did was change from my docref user ref approach to actually using Firestore's document reference data type. So I did a lot of changes to the data model to implement that, so I'll show that as well. So let's have a look. Okay, one big change I made was to change from using my made-up docref user ref, which included a display value for the referenced item, to using the built-in document reference in Firestore. So you can see it here, all these assignees, categories, references to other documents and data and collections of documents use a document reference data type. This ended up taking about 2 weeks to change everything over, but it works a lot better. And the nice thing about it is I no longer have to put a whole bunch of functions, cloud functions, in to keep the referenced things like names and and descriptions up to date whenever a document reference changes. It's just, I know it only points to the document reference, and I found a nice piece of code online where shows a good way of getting the additional information about based on that document reference. That's didn't take too much work. The other thing I did while I'm in here is I added a lot of flags onto the user record to say things like the user can, as a category manager, as a resource manager, as a template manager, to tell me whether that user has special rights. And again, that made things a lot easier. Let's have a look at an example of using the document reference. So you see here, I'm looking at my Firebase Firestore database. I'm looking at one of the checklist items, or one of the checklists, and you can see here's the use of the reference data type, where it's constructed just like the other document references, or just the way you'd see a document reference in Firestore. The collection name, and then the collection actual document ID, collection name, document ID, and that's stored as an actual document reference data type. So I needed to have a way of displaying the reference to the document that was referenced in an easy way. So here's an example of it here. So for this checklist, it's been assigned to the E2E category, and it's displaying the E2E category name based on a doc reference to that document. In the code, we can see the code that's doing this. So it's getting the checklist category, which is a document reference, passing it to a doc pipe, and the doc pipe returns an observable to the reference document. Then it's using the async operator to actually retrieve that document observable, and then I'm getting the name of that particular category, and that's what's getting displayed. So having this doc pipe makes everything a lot easier. So let's have a look at the doc pipe. So this is just set up as a pipe. It receives a Firestore document reference, as you'd expect, and returns an observable to the document that's been referenced. And that's actually using this helper function, get doc reference. So let's have a look at that. So this is the helper function that actually is returning the observable. And again, it's using some downstream functions as well, but returns an observable to that document. So the nice thing is I can just use the pipe wherever I want. When I want to display reference document information, and I also have this helper function if I want to do it, the same thing in the code, is get a observable to the reference document and then do something with it. And even though it took a while to convert, that's the way I'm going to do relationships from now on in Firestore. It makes dealing with them a lot easier. Very straightforward and very consistent, just to have a doc reference to the reference document when you want a relationship to that document. Something else I did was to reorganize my code. So I started off, everything was fairly flat. All the components were at the same level under the source app folder, and things were getting really confusing. Initially I thought I'd change to using Angular modules, but for doing it to where I was in our checklists, it probably wasn't worth the effort. But going forward I will use modules, so I'm planning on, when I go back to FBM Starter, to modularize that, so that any future applications I've got all the modularity in place and able to use it to modularize future projects. So what I did do in this one, which still took a bit of time, was just reorganize the code so everything's not so flat. So you'll see here I've created some subfolders. So under dialogues, anything that was a material dialog I put in there, so that hid a lot of complexity. As usual, I have a services folder to hold all the services and the resolvers. I have a pipes folder to hold any pipes I've created. I have a models folder. That's kind of fairly normal in Angular to have a models folder to have all the models for the various data components. And I have a shared folder for any shared components, so components that aren't at the top level that may be used on multiple other components or can be child components of other components. These are all in the shared folder again, that got a lot of components out of the top level. And by doing that, you can see that scrolling through my top level application, all the main pages in my single page application are at this top level, and then I know which folders to go into to work on subcomponents of that. And that's been working pretty well. Another quick optimization was to add cache control headers to my assets, especially the images. So you see here in the firebase.json, in the headers properties, I say for headers for anything that ends in JPEG, GIF or PNG, add a cache control header with a max age, and this is 1 day, I think. So it doesn't keep retrieving the same image every time it needs it. It just uses the cached version because images don't change very often. Okay, I needed to protect which checklist update functionality you could get to based on the checklist status. So the easiest way I found of doing that was add a guard or a route guard to only allow access to certain checklist components based on it having a status that checklist component is built to manage, and if it doesn't, then it takes the user to the not authorized page. Another thing I did to take repeated code out of the application was to set up this helper service. So I use it for things like showing the snack bar, material snack bar, showing doing a redirect. So this saves a little bit of code, but it also saves having to inject the things like ng zone injectable into the components. I can just call a reference to this. I don't know whether that's a great thing, but it certainly made coding a lot easier. Also do things like being able to build a doc reference by just passing a path. Also getting, as we saw before, getting a doc ref observable from a document reference being passed to it. So the helper service helped quite a bit, just being able to put code I used a lot, commonly used code, into one place. Okay, so that's most of the changes I've made. Probably be a week or so before I get back in, and the next video will be about planning and design for the data analysis part of this application, and then other than cleanup, I should be almost done with our checklists.